They thought they were bringing home a playful German Shepherd puppy until the night he did something no ordinary dog could, revealing a secret that would change their lives forever. The Langston family never imagined a simple trip to the local animal shelter would ignite a chain of events that would unravel everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and even nature itself. At first glance, the puppy looked like any slightly oversized German Shepherd. Big paws, sad brown eyes, and a clumsy sort of grace that made him endearing. They didn't question the strange details at first. How he moved with an eerie, silent precision. How his watchful gaze seemed almost too intelligent, too calculating for a dog so young. They simply chalked it up to quirks of a shelter rescue, especially after the heartbreak they'd endured. The Langstons were willing to accept a little oddness. In their cramped rental apartment, tucked away in the heart of Rockford Heights, every morning was a struggle. Jason Langston stood in the dimly lit kitchen, staring into a chipped mug of instant coffee, watching the granules dissolve into the swirling water like tiny vanishing planets. The microwave clock blinked 7:15 a.m., mocking him with its urgency. Behind him, little Emma sat slumped at the kitchen table, her Hello Kitty backpack sliding off the chair. Her tiny hand moved listlessly over a sheet of crumpled drawing paper, dragging a broken red crayon in the endless loops. A forgotten bowl of cereal sagged into mush beside her. Jason's heart clenched at the sight of her. It had been nearly a year since Megan's death, a sudden aneurysm on a regular Thursday afternoon that had shattered their small family into jagged pieces. Since then, Emma hadn't spoken a single word. The bright, bubbly chatterbox she once was had folded into a silent, sorrowful shell. Jason cleared his throat, forcing a note of false cheer into his voice. "Those are some colorful circles, Pumpkin," he said, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "Maybe we can add a rainbow? Or a dinosaur riding a scooter." Emma only pressed harder on the crayon, her hair falling across her face like a curtain. Jason knew that look. It was her fortress against a world that had suddenly become too loud, too dangerous. Moving quietly, Jason packed her lunch, peanut butter and jelly, of course, crusts trimmed just the way Megan used to do it. Every morning was a balancing act. Keep moving, keep smiling, keep pretending things could be normal again. The walk to school was their daily gauntlet. Emma clutched his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white as they navigated Rockford's busy sidewalks. A delivery truck backfired near the corner, and Emma jumped, pressing herself against Jason's side like a terrified fawn. "Almost there, kiddo," Jason murmured, using Megan's old nickname for her, Starbug. As the elementary school building loomed into view, Jason spotted Mrs. Patel, Emma's first-grade teacher, waving from the front steps. She understood. She never pushed Emma to speak, never treated her silence like a problem to be solved. She simply offered patience, and patience was something Jason clung to like a life raft. "Good morning, Emma," Mrs. Patel said warmly, holding out her hand. Emma hesitated, then released Jason's fingers and took the teacher's hand, her shoulders tight with tension. Jason watched until they disappeared inside the brick building, his heart twisting painfully. He was already late for work. The shared co-working space was buzzing with life when Jason finally arrived. Young tech entrepreneurs, freelancers, coffee cups clutched in one hand, laptops balanced precariously on their knees. Jason slipped into his usual corner, dragging open the overdue design files he'd been avoiding. "Jason," came a voice. He looked up to see his manager, Olivia Dawson, standing over his desk. Her navy blue suit and slick-back hair screamed efficiency. Her tight smile barely masked her frustration. "Can we have a word?" she said, gesturing toward one of the glass-walled meeting rooms. Jason followed, his stomach a knot of dread. The conversation that followed was too familiar. Missed deadlines, clients losing patience, discussions about alternative arrangements, a thinly veiled threat about losing his job. "I know it's been a tough year," Olivia said, her voice softening slightly, "but we're running a business, Jason. One more missed project, and we'll have to move you to freelance status. No benefits, no security." Jason nodded numbly, mentally calculating. Rent, groceries, Emma's therapy sessions, all hanging by a thread. That night, after Emma was tucked silently into bed, Jason sat alone at the kitchen table, his laptop casting a pale blue glow across the dark apartment. His failures felt heavier than ever. Almost without thinking, he typed, "Dog adoption, Rockford Heights." Emma had once dreamed aloud about a dog. She had filled sketchbooks with doodles of imaginary pets, given them grand adventures, silly names, even pretend backstories. Maybe, maybe a dog could be a bridge between then and now. Page after page of hopeful faces filled his screen. Pit bulls, retrievers, a three-legged terrier. Jason was about to shut the laptop, dismissing it as another foolish idea, when he saw him, a thin, slightly scruffy German Shepherd puppy, oversized paws, sad, intelligent eyes sitting quietly in the photo as if he already knew the weight of the world. The description was heartbreakingly simple. Found behind abandoned warehouse. No tags. Approx 5 months old. Calm disposition. Jason hesitated. Their apartment was tiny. Money was tight. Life was already so overwhelming. But those eyes. He bookmarked the page, then slammed the laptop closed before his better judgment could catch up. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and relentless, as if the universe itself was whispering, "Everything is about to change." They thought the adoption would heal old wounds, but they never imagined the creature they brought home had its own silent mission. Morning crept into the apartment like a reluctant guest, muted and gray. The rain from the night before had thickened into a stubborn mist, blurring the cracked sidewalks and washing Rockford Heights in a weary haze. Jason Langston stood by the apartment window, staring out at the wet city below, his coffee cooling untouched in his hand. His mind was already elsewhere, locked on those deep brown eyes he'd seen on the shelter website, eyes that had stared right through the camera and into something he hadn't known was still alive inside him. Across the small living room, Emma sat on the couch, one knee pulled up to her chest, doodling circles on an old notebook. She hadn't spoken a word that morning, but Jason swore he saw something different in her body language, a faint energy, like a tiny flicker of anticipation she couldn't yet name. Jason made his decision quietly. No grand declarations, no second guessing. He grabbed his jacket, slipped Emma's favorite yellow raincoat over her small frame, and together they stepped into the misty morning, their footsteps echoing down the apartment stairs. The shelter wasn't far, tucked between a faded laundromat and a shuttered comic book store. A mural of cartoon dogs covered the building's cracked front wall, a splash of cheerful paint against the urban decay. The worn bell above the door jingled softly as they entered, and the smell of antiseptic and wet fur rushed out to meet them. Behind a battered desk sat a woman with a practical bob haircut and sneakers that had seen better days. "You must be Jason," she said, rising with a warm smile. "I'm Marlene, and this must be your little helper." Emma tucked herself tightly against Jason's side, her fingers digging into his jacket. Marlene didn't push. She simply smiled wider and gestured toward the back hallway. "Come on, let's introduce you two." The kennels were lined up like a sad little city of lost souls. Dogs barked, whined, and howled as they passed, an overwhelming cacophony of need and loneliness. Jason felt Emma tense with every yelp. But at the very end of the row, in the last kennel on the left, there was silence. He was even larger in person than he looked online. Sitting patiently behind the chain-link gate, the German Shepherd puppy tilted his head slightly as they approached, his intelligent eyes locking onto Emma with an intensity that made Jason's skin prickle. The dog didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stood up carefully and pressed one massive paw against the mesh door. Emma froze. Jason's heart pounded. Would she be afraid? Would she pull away? Instead, to his amazement, Emma stepped forward. Tentative, yes, but steady. She reached out a tiny hand and touched her fingers to the paw resting against the fence. It was like flipping a switch. The air around them seemed to hum. Jason could almost hear it, a silent agreement passing between child and creature, a fragile bridge forming out of thin mist and desperate hope. Marlene spoke softly, almost as if afraid to disturb the connection. He came in about 3 weeks ago, found behind an abandoned furniture warehouse. No chip, no tags. He's quiet, almost too quiet. Eats well, listens good, but there's something different about him. Jason barely heard her. His eyes were locked on Emma, who had dropped to her knees in front of the kennel, her forehead resting against the cool metal, nose to nose with a massive puppy. "We'll take him," Jason said, before doubt could poison the moment. Marlene smiled, though there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease she quickly masked. "All right," she said, pulling paperwork from a folder. "He's up to date on his shots. You'll need to schedule a vet checkup within the week, and," she hesitated, "just keep an eye on him. He's growing fast. Faster than normal, even for a shepherd." Jason signed where needed, barely reading the documents. The adoption fee was modest. The process was quick. In less than 30 minutes, they were standing outside in the mist again, a battered leash in Jason's hand, and a silent, oversized puppy patting carefully at Emma's side. The walk home was surreal. Emma didn't speak. She didn't even look up, but she kept her fingers buried in the thick fur at the base of the dog's neck, tethered to him like a ship to an anchor. Jason tried not to stare, but the sight filled him with an emotion so raw he couldn't quite name it. Hope, maybe, or something deeper, something more ancient. Back at the apartment, the dog's size became even more apparent. Navigating the cramped space was a challenge. His shoulders brushed against the coffee table. His tail, a powerful brush of muscle and fur, nearly swept the cereal bowls off the counter. Jason crouched to unclip the leash. "All right, big guy," he murmured. "Welcome home." The dog sat immediately, his gaze moving between Jason and Emma with unnerving focus, as if evaluating them, weighing them, deciding something. And then, just as Jason was about to stand, it happened. A whisper. So faint Jason almost thought he imagined it. "Atlas," Emma breathed. Jason froze. He turned slowly to see his daughter's hand resting lightly on the dog's head, her lips moving around the strange, beautiful word. "Atlas." The dog thumped his tail once, slow and deliberate, and lowered his massive head into her lap. Jason's hands trembled as he backed away into the kitchen, heart hammering against his ribs. He gripped the counter for support, staring at the scene unfolding just a few feet away. His daughter, silent for nearly a year, was speaking again, and somehow, impossibly, it was because of him. Atlas, a name that felt ancient and inevitable, a name that felt right. And somewhere deep in Jason's chest, a small voice whispered, "This is no ordinary dog." But Jason wasn't ready to listen to that voice just yet. Not yet. They thought bringing Atlas home would bring peace, but with each passing hour, it became clear they had invited something far greater than they understood. The apartment seemed to hold its breath the first night Atlas arrived. Jason sat on the worn couch, pretending to focus on emails while stealing glances at Emma and their new companion. The TV murmured quietly in the background, casting flickering shadows across the small living room. But Jason barely noticed the cartoon characters dancing across the screen. His eyes kept drifting to Atlas. The massive puppy lay stretched across the carpet, close enough to Emma that his breathing stirred the hem of her pajama pants. His oversized paws were tucked neatly under him, his dark eyes never fully closing even when he appeared to sleep. He was there, alert, watchful, present in a way that felt almost strategic. Jason shook his head and chuckled softly under his breath. "Get a grip," he muttered. "He's just a smart dog." But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already taking root. As the evening wore on, Jason prepared Emma's bedtime routine. Warm bath, favorite storybook, nightlight plugged into the socket by her bed, casting a soft golden glow over the walls. Emma climbed into bed without a word, clutching her stuffed unicorn tightly to her chest. Atlas moved with her, taking up a position just inside her doorway. He didn't climb onto the bed, didn't beg for attention. He simply lay down, his body spanning nearly the entire threshold, his head resting on his massive paws. a guardian, a sentinel. Jason pulled the door halfway closed, leaving it just as Emma preferred. He stood there for a long moment, watching the two of them, the silent girl and the silent beast, before turning away. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay awake in the darkness, listening, and somewhere between the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside, he heard it, the subtle, rhythmic sound of breathing. Heavy, steady, not from Emma's small chest, but from Atlas stationed at her door, keeping vigil as if his very existence depended on it. The next morning, the apartment felt different. The sunlight through the windows seemed warmer. Emma sat at the coffee table, not just drawing aimless circles, but actual pictures. Messy, colorful depictions of a dog far too large for the tiny furniture. And although she remained mostly silent, there was something lighter in the set of her shoulders. Something Jason hadn't seen in almost a year. Jason sipped his coffee, pretending not to stare, pretending not to hope. Atlas, meanwhile, moved through the apartment with a care that bordered on eerie. Despite his enormous size, he never knocked over a single thing. He wove between chair legs, sidestepped clutter, and avoided the precariously stacked books by the front door like he had memorized the layout in a single pass. Jason had owned dogs before, grew up with them even, but none had ever moved like this. None had ever watched like this. Later that morning, Jason decided to test their new normal with a short walk around the block. He fitted Atlas with the same battered leash Marlene had given them at the shelter, tugging it twice to ensure it was secure. "All right, Atlas," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. "Let's see how you do in the wild." Emma slipped on her sneakers and yellow raincoat without being asked, a small miracle in itself, and they stepped out into the crisp air. Rockford Heights was already stirring, car horns blaring, shopkeepers pulling up battered steel gates, pigeons scattering from sidewalk crumbs. Atlas stayed perfectly at Emma's side. He didn't lunge at pigeons, didn't bark at passing dogs straining at their leashes. In fact, the more chaos they encountered, the calmer Atlas seemed to become, as if crowds, noise, and unpredictability were simply problems he had already accounted for. They passed a bus stop where two teenagers were arguing loudly, their words sharp and ugly. Jason tensed instinctively, steering Emma closer to the curb, ready to shield her if necessary. But before he could react, Atlas moved, not with aggression, not with growls or bared teeth. He simply adjusted his position, placing his massive body squarely between Emma and the shouting teens. His stance relaxed but immovable. A living wall. The teens broke off their argument mid-sentence, their faces shifting from anger to uncertainty. One muttered something under his breath. The other turned away altogether. Jason stared at Atlas, a chill running down his spine. "Good boy," he said hoarsely, patting the dog's massive shoulder. Atlas didn't react to the praise. He simply flicked his ears back toward Emma, as if checking to ensure she was unharmed, then resumed walking. The rest of the outing passed in a daze. Jason couldn't stop watching him, this creature who moved with a veteran's instincts despite his youth, who seemed utterly dedicated to Emma's safety as if it were his only purpose. By the time they returned to the apartment, Jason's mind was buzzing. He pulled out his phone and Googled German Shepherd growth patterns. Charts and articles filled the screen. At 5 months old, the breed averaged between 45 to 60 pounds. Jason stole a glance at Atlas, sprawled across the living room rug like a living monument. No way he was under 70 pounds already. Maybe even closer to 80. And growing by the day, he dug deeper. Weight charts, puppy behavior blogs, breed standard discussions. Nothing quite fit. Even among large shepherds, Atlas was an outlier. His paws alone looked big enough to serve Thanksgiving dinner on. Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. "He's just big," he muttered to himself. "Big and smart. That's all." But even as he said it, a gnawing unease pressed at the edges of his mind. He thought about the adoption paperwork. Shepherd mix, Marlene had written. Breed unknown. A blanket explanation for a creature that already defied labels. Jason glanced over at Emma. She was lying on the floor now, sketchbook in front of her, and Atlas curled around her protectively like the walls of a fortress. Every so often, she would whisper something into his massive ear, and his tail would thump once, steady and reassuring. Jason's throat tightened. For the first time in a long time, Emma looked safe. For the first time in a long time, Jason didn't feel like he was failing her. He closed the laptop with a soft click and rose from the chair. Whatever Atlas was, whoever or whatever had sent him, Jason wasn't letting him go. Not now, not ever. What seemed like small quirks at first soon spiraled into chilling signs. The family realized their new companion might not be a dog at all. The days that followed blurred into a strange new rhythm. Atlas fit into their lives like he had always belonged, yet the apartment felt undeniably different now. Charged, as if the air itself buzzed faintly with unseen electricity. Jason noticed it first at night. The apartment was never fully silent anymore. Sometimes, just past midnight, Jason would wake to the softest sounds. A low rumble vibrating through the floor, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. He would sit up in bed, heart hammering in the darkness, straining to hear. The sound was always the same. Atlas, pacing. Not frantically, not like a restless dog, but methodically. 3 steps forward, pause, listen, 3 steps back. Always stationed near Emma's door, like a soldier walking a post. And sometimes, though Jason would never admit it out loud, it almost sounded like Atlas was growling under his breath. Not in anger, but in warning. Warning against what? Jason never knew, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. One particular morning, the tension escalated in ways Jason couldn't ignore. He was packing Emma's lunch in the kitchen when it happened. Atlas sat by the front door, his tail neatly curled around his paws, his gaze fixed on the hallway outside. Suddenly, his entire body went rigid. His hackles rose, not dramatically, but enough that Jason caught the subtle lift in his thick fur. His ears flattened slightly, and a deep, guttural sound rumbled from his chest. Jason froze. The air shifted. The refrigerator hummed loudly in the sudden stillness. Emma looked up from her coloring book, sensing it too. Before Jason could react, there was a loud, heavy knock at the door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the thin walls of the apartment. Jason's stomach tightened. No one knocked at their door unannounced. Ever. He moved cautiously, setting down the butter knife he'd been using to spread peanut butter. Atlas shifted closer to the door, muscles taut, body blocking it completely. Jason peered through the peephole. Nothing. An empty hallway. He opened the door slowly, heart racing. No one there. Just the faint smell of wet concrete and hallway cleaner. He closed the door carefully, sliding the bolt into place. His hands trembled slightly as he turned back toward Atlas, who had relaxed marginally but kept his position. "Good boy," Jason whispered, even though he didn't feel brave enough to believe it. The incident haunted him all day. At work, he stared blankly at his laptop, the cursor blinking against an empty document. His thoughts were stuck on Atlas, how the dog had reacted, how he'd somehow known before Jason even heard the knock. By the time he picked Emma up from school, Jason's mind was a battlefield of worry and rationalization. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Atlas had heard footsteps. Maybe his instincts were just sharper. Maybe. But deep down, Jason knew better, and the signs only grew more obvious. That night, while Jason tried to catch up on work at the coffee table, Emma played quietly with her toys. Atlas lay sprawled out beside her, one eye half closed but the other tracking every movement at the window. Then Emma did something that made Jason's heart lurch. She whispered into Atlas's ear, giggled softly, and then, without hesitation, began stacking her storybooks into a wall around him, like a tiny fortress. Atlas stayed perfectly still, letting her build. Not once did he move, shift, or twitch. He watched her with such focused patience it felt almost rehearsed, calculated. When Emma finished, she sat cross-legged beside him and whispered, "Now nothing bad can get in." And Atlas, Jason swore, nodded. Not a random dip of the head, A deliberate slow dip and rise, a gesture of agreement. Jason nearly dropped his laptop. Later that night, after Emma was tucked safely in bed with Atlas stationed by her door, Jason sat alone at the kitchen table, phone in hand. He opened a search engine, his fingers hesitant over the keyboard. Dogs that don't act like dogs. Animals that protect children instinctively. Strange dog behavior after adoption. Each search yielded a mix of ghost stories, urban legends, and pseudoscience. Nothing real, nothing concrete. But the seed of fear continued to grow. The next afternoon, the unease escalated. They were walking home from the park, a ritual Jason had reinstated in hopes of giving Emma more reasons to smile. The streets were busier than usual, commuters rushing past with barely a glance. Jason kept Emma close, her tiny hand clinging to his jacket. Atlas walked slightly ahead, leading without pulling, his head high, ears swiveling like satellite dishes. And then Jason saw him, a man standing across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a boarded-up storefront. Hood pulled low, hands shoved into deep jacket pockets. He wasn't moving. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, except them. Jason felt it in his gut before his brain caught up. Atlas sensed it too. Without warning, the massive dog moved, not running, not growling, but shifting his body so he stood fully between the stranger and Emma. The man seemed to realize he'd been spotted. He turned sharply, vanishing into the crowd without a word. Jason's skin crawled. He scanned the street, half expecting the man to reappear. But he was gone. Just another face swallowed by the city. Jason tightened his grip on Emma's hand and hurried their pace, his heart thudding heavily against his ribs. Atlas never looked back. He simply continued forward, his body tense, his ears pinned back, scanning. That night, Jason didn't sleep. He lay awake, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling. Atlas stayed by Emma's door as always. But now Jason understood something he'd only sensed before. Atlas wasn't guarding their home. He was guarding Emma, specifically, singularly, unrelentingly, as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. And the realization left Jason wondering, what exactly had they brought home? When a routine vet visit turned into a chilling discovery, they realized Atlas wasn't just growing. He was evolving into something beyond their understanding. The steady rhythm of life with Atlas carried them through the next few days. School drop-offs, evening walks, whispered conversations between Emma and her towering protector. But the signs could no longer be ignored. Atlas was growing, and not the way a puppy normally would. Jason noticed it first when he tried to adjust the collar Marlene had given them at the shelter. Just 2 weeks ago, it had fit snugly around Atlas's neck. Now, even at its largest setting, it pressed too tightly against the thickening muscles. Jason bought a new collar, extra large, meant for full-grown mastiffs, and even that barely fit. By midweek, Jason decided it was time for a professional opinion. "Come on, big guy," he said one morning, slipping the leash onto Atlas's collar. "Let's get you checked out." Emma looked up from her drawing, concern flickering across her face. She set her crayon down and crossed the room, wrapping her arms around Atlas's thick neck. "I'll bring him right back, Starbug," Jason promised, ruffling her hair. She nodded, but her fingers lingered in Atlas's fur a second longer before letting go. The vet's office was a modest brick building on the far side of Rockford Heights, tucked between a hardware store and a dry cleaner. The faded sign above the door read, "Silver Creek Veterinary Clinic, Compassionate Care since 1983. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and dog biscuits. The walls were lined with faded posters of smiling golden retrievers and purring tabby cats. At the front desk, a young woman in lavender scrubs smiled warmly. "First visit?" "Yeah," Jason said, patting Atlas's side. "We just adopted him." The woman's eyes widened slightly as she took in Atlas's size. "Puppy, huh?" she said, her voice lifting with polite disbelief. Jason forced a smile. "Supposedly 5 months old. Shepherd mix." The woman didn't argue, but Jason caught the fleeting glance she exchanged with her co-worker behind the desk. Moments later, they were ushered into a small examination room. Atlas moved with perfect ease, stepping onto the metal scale without needing encouragement. Jason watched the numbers climb. 79 pounds. 79 pounds. And not even 6 months old. The door opened and Dr. Patel entered, a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of brisk efficiency. "Well, let's meet this handsome boy," she said, crouching to Atlas's level. Atlas didn't flinch or resist as she examined him. He submitted calmly to the routine poking and prodding, his tail sweeping the floor exactly once when Emma's scent lingered on Jason's jacket. Dr. Patel frowned as she moved through the examination. She checked his teeth, his gums, his joints, ran her hands down the length of his massive legs, listened to his heart. Finally, she stepped back, a wrinkle forming between her brows. "You said 5 months?" she asked. "That's what the shelter paperwork said," Jason replied, unease prickling the back of his neck. Dr. Patel hesitated, flipping through Atlas's intake notes. "He's unusual." She said it gently, like she was trying not to alarm him. "Unusual how?" Jason pressed. "Growth rate for one. He's bigger than most adult shepherds. His bone density feels heavier. His paws," she shook her head, "they're massive, even accounting for breed variance." She paused, studying Atlas thoughtfully. "Have you noticed any unusual behavior?" Jason thought about the silent pacing at night, the unflinching protection, the way he seemed to understand words that hadn't even been spoken yet. "He's incredibly smart," Jason said carefully. "Very calm, very protective of my daughter." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "That's good, but it's also interesting." She scribbled a note on the clipboard. "Look, he's healthy. His heart sounds strong. His coat is improving. No obvious health concerns right now. But—" Jason leaned forward. "But what?" "You might want to do a genetic panel," she said delicately, "just to get a better idea of what you're working with. It's rare, but sometimes shelter dogs come from unusual mixes, breeds that aren't typical for suburban homes." Jason's stomach twisted. "Unusual like what?" "Guardian breeds," she said, watching his reaction. "Mountain dogs, feral lines, breeds designed more for protection than companionship." She smiled quickly, softening the blow. "He's beautiful and clearly bonded to your daughter. Just keep an eye on his development and call if anything seems off." Jason nodded numbly, tucking the leash back into his hand. "Thanks, doctor." Atlas rose smoothly to his feet, towering over the exam table now, dwarfing the delicate room. As they left the clinic, Jason felt the receptionist's gaze following them. Other pet owners in the lobby shifted uneasily, steering their small dogs behind their legs. Atlas ignored it all. He stayed pressed to Jason's side, moving with a purposeful grace that seemed almost unnatural for something his size. In the car, Jason sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Atlas lay across the back seat, filling it almost entirely. His eyes were open, watching Jason in the mirror, silent, waiting, protective. Jason exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. "What are you, Atlas?" he whispered. The dog blinked once, slow and deliberate, and for the first time, Jason wasn't sure he wanted an answer. At first, they thought he was just protecting her, but the way Atlas watched Emma soon crossed into something far more chilling. The ride back from the vet was unusually silent. Even Emma, who normally bubbled over with quiet whispers and occasional giggles when Atlas was near, seemed subdued. She sat huddled in her seat, one hand resting on the dog's thick fur, while her eyes stayed locked out the window. Jason's mind churned the whole way home. Unusual growth, guardian breeds, feral lines. He gripped the steering wheel tighter every time he replayed Dr. Patel's words. And then there was Atlas himself, silent, steady, impenetrable. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that Atlas knew something he didn't, or worse, that he was preparing for something Jason couldn't even imagine. Back at the apartment, life tried to settle back into normal. But it wasn't normal. Not anymore. Everywhere Jason looked, Atlas was there. Not just existing, but observing. When Jason made coffee, Atlas sat by the counter, watching every movement. When Emma colored at the coffee table, Atlas curled around her, not lazily, but with an almost tactical placement of his body, shielding her from every open window, every door. Even when Jason tucked Emma into bed, Atlas was already there, positioned perfectly between her bed and the door, his dark eyes gleaming in the nightlight's dim glow. Jason had owned dogs before, protective ones, loyal ones. But this was different. Atlas wasn't just guarding Emma. He was tracking her. Every blink, every breath, every subtle shift in her emotions seemed mirrored in his silent, watchful demeanor. One evening, Jason decided to test a theory gnawing at the back of his mind. While Emma and Atlas were playing in the living room, Jason crept quietly toward the front door. He slipped his shoes on and cracked the door open, pretending he needed to run down to the mailbox. Before he could take a full step into the hallway, Atlas exploded into motion. Not violently, not barking, but he was there, blocking the door, massive body braced against the frame, muscles taut under his thick coat. He didn't growl, he didn't bare his teeth. He just stood there, a silent wall between Jason and the world outside. Jason's heart hammered against his ribs. "It's okay, boy," he said softly, crouching down. "I'll be right back. Just the mailbox." Atlas stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, only after Jason stepped back into the apartment, Atlas relaxed. Jason closed the door, leaned his forehead against it, and tried to catch his breath. Emma didn't even react. It was as if she had expected it, accepted it. Later that night, Jason sat at his computer, searching for answers he knew he wouldn't find. Guardian instincts in large dog breeds. Dogs who won't let owners leave. Unusual attachment behavior in adopted dogs. The articles blurred together. Separation anxiety, protective aggression, territorial behavior. None of it fit. Atlas wasn't anxious. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't territorial. He was calculated, measured, purposeful. It was almost like he'd been assigned to Emma. Jason scrubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion clawing at him. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it was just the strain of the past year catching up to him. But then, there was the incident with the window. It happened 2 nights later. Jason was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to focus on freelance work while Emma and Atlas lay side by side on the living room rug. The quiet hum of the city drifted through the cracked window. Sirens in the distance, the occasional bark of a stray dog, the low thrum of bass from a passing car. Jason barely noticed the movement at first, just a shadow flickering across the window, then a soft scrape, like fingertips brushing the glass. Jason's head snapped up. Atlas was already on his feet, hackles raised, body rigid. Before Jason could move, the dog launched toward the window, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Emma screamed, a short, sharp sound that punched Jason straight in the chest. He bolted from his chair just as Atlas collided with the window, paws striking the glass with a thundering boom that shook the entire frame. Jason caught a glimpse, a figure outside, stumbling back from the window. Tall, dark hoodie. Running now, disappearing into the shadows between buildings. Atlas growled low and furious, the sound vibrating through the walls. Jason raced to the window and yanked it shut, fumbling with the lock. His hands shook as he pulled the curtains tight. Emma clung to Atlas, bearing her face in his thick ruff. The dog stood stone still, head lifted, nose twitching as he tracked the fading scent outside. "It's okay," Jason said hoarsely, more to himself than anyone else. "It's okay now." But it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. He sank to the floor beside Emma, wrapping his arms around her and Atlas both, feeling the dog's heart pounding as hard as his own. "Who was that, Dad?" Emma whispered, voice trembling. Jason kissed the top of her head. "I don't know, baby," he lied. Because the truth was worse than anything he could admit aloud. Someone had been watching them. And Atlas, this impossibly large, impossibly aware creature, had known it before Jason had even sensed a thing. That night, Jason pushed the couch against the front door. He wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Atlas didn't leave his post all night. He lay across the threshold, a massive silent shadow, watching, waiting. Jason didn't sleep. He sat up with a baseball bat clutched in his lap, jumping at every creak, every shifting shadow. In the dim light, Jason looked at Atlas, and for the first time, he wasn't just grateful. He was afraid. Not of what Atlas might do, but of what he might be preparing for. Jason tried to dismiss the growing dread, but every instinct screamed that Atlas wasn't here by accident. He was here for something or someone. Morning came slowly, dragging a sickly gray light across the apartment. Jason sat at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of cold coffee he hadn't touched. The night's adrenaline still buzzed under his skin, keeping him wired and twitchy even as exhaustion gnawed at his mind. Emma was curled up on the couch, asleep beneath a thick blanket. Atlas lay nearby, not quite asleep, not quite awake, just watching, always watching. Jason raked his fingers through his unwashed hair. Something was wrong, not just with the strange man outside the window, not just with Atlas's bizarre behavior, but with everything. He needed answers. Without disturbing Emma, Jason grabbed his laptop and opened a private browser window. Typing slowly, deliberately, he entered the one question he hadn't dared ask until now. How to tell if your dog isn't a dog. The search results made him want to slam the laptop shut. Forums filled with wild theories, urban legends about spirit animals, guardian beasts, shapeshifters hiding among stray dogs, stories of massive, silent creatures arriving in times of great loss, always near children, always near tragedy. Jason's throat tightened. He forced himself to keep reading. One post caught his eye, a long thread buried deep on a paranormal forum titled, "The Guardians Among Us." The post told a story about a remote village in the Scottish Highlands, where, generations ago, children were sometimes watched over by massive, wolf-like creatures no one had ever been able to fully explain. Creatures that didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't age like normal dogs. Creatures that only appeared during times of terrible grief or terrible danger. Jason sat back, heart thudding painfully against his ribs. Could it really be possible? Could something ancient, something other, have found its way into his home? He shut the laptop with a snap, shoving it away from him. This was crazy. He was losing it. There had to be a logical explanation. But when he glanced over at Atlas, who was now watching him with those deep, almost human eyes, Jason wasn't so sure anymore. Later that afternoon, Jason decided they needed air. He bundled Emma into her coat, clipped Atlas's leash to his oversized collar, and stepped outside into the brittle November chill. The sidewalks were busy but not crowded. People bustled past, heads down, shoulders hunched against the cold. A typical day in Rockford Heights, except for one thing. Everywhere they went, every block they crossed, every alley they passed, Atlas was tense. His body stayed tight to Emma's side, positioning himself between her and the rest of the world. When a stranger passed too close, Atlas shifted subtly, forcing a polite but undeniable distance. When a car door slammed across the street, his ears flicked forward, assessing, calculating. He was working, not playing, not walking, guarding. Halfway through their route, Jason spotted a man leaning against a lamppost, hood up, face obscured. The same building, the same posture. Jason's stomach dropped. Was it the same man from the window? Before he could react, Atlas moved. Smoothly, silently, the dog shifted his body, pressing against Jason's side, forcing him and Emma to the far edge of the sidewalk. The man noticed. He pushed off the lamppost, pretending to fiddle with his phone. But Jason caught the glint of his eyes beneath the hood, watching them, tracking them. Jason tightened his grip on Emma's hand. "Come on, Starbug," he murmured. "Let's go home." They crossed the street without looking back. Atlas never once glanced at the man. He didn't need to. He already knew. Back in the safety of their apartment, Jason double-locked the door, slid the couch back in front of it, and sat heavily on the floor. Emma climbed into his lap, burrowing into his jacket. Atlas circled the room once, checking windows, corners, doors, before finally settling himself in front of Emma, like a breathing barricade. Jason pressed his forehead against his daughter's messy hair. "It's gonna be okay," he whispered, more for himself than for her. But even as he said it, he realized he didn't believe it anymore. Because something was building, something unseen, and whatever Atlas really was, he was preparing for it. That night, Jason dreamed. In the dream, he stood on a vast empty plain beneath a sky boiling with dark clouds. Lightning flashed in the distance, revealing a sea of monstrous shapes, eyes gleaming, jaws snapping, shadows swirling. In the center of it all stood Emma, small, fragile, and before her, standing firm against the oncoming storm, was Atlas. But he wasn't a dog anymore. He was larger, broader, almost ancient, his fur darker than night, his teeth gleaming like polished stone. His eyes blazed with a fierce, unearthly light. He turned his massive head and looked directly at Jason. And in that look, Jason saw it all. The weight of centuries, the duty, the promise. "Protect her," the Dream Atlas seemed to say. "At all costs." Jason woke gasping, heart pounding so violently it hurt. The apartment was dark, silent, except for the soft sound of breathing, Emma's steady rhythm, and Atlas's slower, heavier cadence from just outside her door. Jason sat up, pressing a shaking hand to his chest. He didn't believe in omens, didn't believe in legends, but somehow in that moment he knew. Atlas wasn't just protecting Emma from the dangers Jason could see. He was preparing to protect her from something Jason couldn't even begin to understand. Something coming closer every day. And when it arrived, Jason feared he might not be enough. Only Atlas would stand between Emma and whatever nightmare waited just beyond the horizon. When strangers started reacting to Atlas with fear instead of curiosity, Jason realized the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. The next morning arrived with a brittle, biting chill that seeped through the apartment's thin windows. Jason moved mechanically, packing Emma's lunch, checking her backpack, brushing her hair while she squirmed sleepily in her chair. Atlas sat by the door as always, watching every movement with those ancient, knowing eyes. Jason tried to ignore the growing unease coiled tight in his gut, tried to pretend everything was still normal. But the dream clung to him like a second skin. The storm, the monstrous shapes, the silent message in Atlas's burning gaze. Protect her. It was Saturday and Jason decided they needed a distraction. Something simple, something human. The local park wasn't far, just a few blocks away. Old, worn down, but safe enough in the daylight. At least it used to be. Jason clipped the leash onto Atlas's collar and zipped Emma into her bright yellow coat, the same one she insisted on wearing no matter the weather. Together they stepped into the cold morning air. The streets were quieter than usual. Jason caught himself scanning the sidewalks, the shadows between buildings, looking for the man in the hoodie, looking for anything out of place. Atlas felt it too. Jason could tell by the way his ears never stopped swiveling, by the tension vibrating through the leash despite the dog's outward calm. At the park, children played on the rusted swings and battered merry-go-round. Parents sipped coffee from styrofoam cups, chatting in small clusters by the benches. It looked normal. Jason exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the fear. "Go play, Starbug," he said gently, giving Emma a little push toward the swings. Emma hesitated, glancing up at him. Jason smiled. "Atlas and I will be right here." That seemed to be enough. Emma skipped toward the swings, the yellow of her coat flashing like a beacon under the pale sun. Atlas moved to stand a few feet from Jason, his gaze locked on Emma, body coiled like a spring. Jason watched too. At first, everything seemed fine. Emma took a few tentative swings, kicking her feet out, building slow momentum. A boy about her age approached, offering her a small, shy smile. Emma hesitated, then smiled back. Jason's chest tightened painfully at the sight. It had been so long since she connected with anyone outside of their little world. The boy said something Jason couldn't hear, and Emma giggled, a soft, fragile sound. Jason grinned and wiped his eyes discreetly. But the moment was short-lived. The boy's father approached, a broad-shouldered man in a thick flannel jacket, holding a soccer ball under one arm. When he spotted Atlas standing guard near Jason, The man's entire posture changed. He stiffened. His smile faltered. He yanked his son back by the arm with surprising force, muttering something Jason couldn't make out. Jason watched, confused, as the man steered his son toward the far side of the playground, casting wary glances over his shoulder. And he wasn't the only one. Parents whispered behind coffee cups. Mothers scooped up toddlers and moved them farther away. One woman pointed openly, murmuring something to her friend. Jason's stomach dropped. He knelt beside Atlas, placing a hand on the dog's broad shoulder. "You're okay, boy," he said under his breath. "They're just scared because you're big. That's all." Atlas didn't react. His gaze remained locked on Emma, unwavering, unapologetic. Jason straightened, trying to act casual. But the stares continued, the whispers. One father gathered his kids and left the playground altogether, shooting Jason a look that was half anger, half fear. Jason wanted to shout, "He's just a dog," wanted to explain, but even he didn't fully believe it anymore. Atlas wasn't just a big dog. He wasn't just unusually calm or unusually smart. He was other. The realization hit Jason like a physical blow. He glanced around the playground, his pulse spiking. They couldn't stay here. Emma was laughing again, pushing herself higher on the swing, her yellow coat flaring out like the wings of a small bird. Atlas's body shifted subtly, preparing to move if needed. Jason made a decision. "Come on, Starbug," he called, forcing a cheerful tone into his voice. "Time to head home." Emma pouted but dragged her feet toward him, swinging her small hand into his. Jason kept his head down as they left the playground, feeling the weight of a dozen suspicious eyes burning into his back. As they rounded the corner and disappeared from view, Jason allowed himself a glance back. The parents were still clustered together, watching them go. Some crossed themselves. Some pulled out their phones. Jason's blood turned to ice. He tightened his grip on Emma's hand and picked up their pace, Atlas trotting silently at his side. By the time they reached their apartment, Jason's heart was pounding so hard he felt dizzy. He double-locked the door behind them, slid the couch back into place, and collapsed into a chair. Emma wandered toward her coloring books, oblivious to the fear pulsing through the room like a living thing. Atlas sat squarely in front of the door, waiting, listening. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What are you really, Atlas?" he whispered into the silence. "And what? Are you protecting her from?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink. But Jason could feel the answer vibrating in the air around him. Something was coming. Something worse than strange men lurking in alleys. Worse than whispers at the park. Something ancient. And Atlas, whatever he truly was, had been sent to stand between it and Emma, no matter the cost. Just when Jason thought he had seen the worst, a knock at the door revealed the terrifying truth. They were already being watched. The apartment felt too small that evening. Jason paced from the kitchen to the living room, heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. He checked the locks 3 times, peered through the peephole twice, and even drew the curtains tighter until no sliver of light could creep through. Emma colored quietly at the coffee table. Atlas sprawled beside her like a silent fortress. Jason kept looking at them, at the tiny girl and the massive creature guarding her, and wondering how the pieces of his life had twisted into something he barely recognized. He should call someone, tell someone, but who? And what would he even say? My daughter's service dog might not be a dog at all. And oh, by the way, I think strangers are stalking us. They'd take Emma away before he could even finish the sentence. The thought was unbearable. Jason ran his hands through his hair, feeling the crushing weight of helplessness settling on his chest. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, loud, deliberate, no hesitation. Atlas snapped to attention so fast that Jason flinched. The dog moved between Emma and the door, his massive frame vibrating with tension, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Jason's mouth went dry. He approached the door slowly, carefully. "Who is it?" he called through the wood, trying to keep the tremble out of his voice. Silence, then a low, rough voice. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need to talk to you. About the dog." Jason stiffened. His first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend they weren't home. But something in the voice stopped him. Urgent, gravelly, desperate. He peered through the peephole. An older man stood in the hallway, shoulders hunched against the cold, a battered jacket pulled tight around his frame. His hair was salt and pepper, his face lined with deep creases. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly. Jason hesitated, heart racing. Atlas stood motionless, but his low growl vibrated through the room like a living warning. Jason turned to Emma. "Go to your room, sweetheart," he said gently. Emma hesitated, looking from Jason to Atlas. "Go on. Take Atlas with you," Jason added. Surprisingly, Atlas didn't move. He stayed planted in front of the door, his body a wall of living muscle. Jason swallowed hard. "It's okay, buddy," he said quietly. "I'll handle it." Emma backed away slowly, retreating into her room but leaving the door cracked just enough for Atlas to watch. Jason took a deep breath, then unlatched the door, keeping the chain lock in place, and cracked it open. "What do you want?" Jason demanded. The old man leaned closer, his eyes sharp and intense. "I don't want anything, but you're in danger. You and the girl." Jason's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" "Name's Harris," the man said gruffly. "Used to work with a special branch. Let's just say I know what that thing inside your apartment really is." Jason stiffened instinctively, pushing the door closed a little further. "He's just a dog," he said, though the words felt hollow even to himself. Harris's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Sure," he said softly, "and I'm the Easter Bunny." Jason's mind raced. This was insane. Absolutely insane. And yet, something about the man's steady gaze, the weariness carved into his face, made it impossible to dismiss him outright. "You're not the first," Harris continued, "and you won't be the last. They come when they're needed. Only when they're needed." Jason's throat felt tight. "What are you talking about?" Harris glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to appear in the hallway. "You think you found that dog by accident?" he said. "You didn't. He found you. Found her." Jason shook his head. "Look, I don't know what you think you know, but we're fine. We don't need—" "They're already watching," Harris interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "That's why you've seen the shadows. The man in the hoodie, the knocks at the window. They're not random. They're testing him. Testing you." Jason's heart jackhammered in his chest. "Who's watching?" he rasped. Harris leaned closer, dropping his voice to a harsh whisper. "The ones that want her." Jason recoiled instinctively. "You're crazy," he muttered, starting to shut the door. "Maybe," Harris said, unmoved. "But that doesn't mean I'm wrong." Jason hesitated. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe it. And yet, the things he'd seen, the way Atlas moved, the way the world itself seemed to twist around them. "Why her?" Jason demanded before he could stop himself. Harris's expression softened slightly, almost pitying. "Some children are born marked," he said. "Special, sensitive. They shine too brightly in the dark. And the dark notices." Jason's grip tightened on the door. "What do they want with her?" "What they always want," Harris said grimly. "To snuff out the light before it grows strong enough to burn them away." Jason's stomach churned. "What about Atlas?" he forced out. "He's not a dog," Harris said simply. "He's a shield, a weapon, a guardian bred by forces older than you or me. You think you adopted him? He chose you, chose her, because she's not safe without him." Jason stared at the man, the words slamming into him like physical blows. Everything made sense, and yet none of it made sense. "What do I do?" Jason whispered. Harris's eyes gleamed under the flickering hallway light. "Trust him," he said. "Listen to him. When the time comes, and it will, you let him do what he was made to do." Jason wanted to ask more, wanted to demand proof, but Harris stepped back into the hallway, pulling up his collar against the cold. "I won't be around when it happens," he said over his shoulder, "but you'll know when it's time." Then he disappeared into the stairwell, his footsteps fading into the silence. Jason closed the door slowly, sliding every bolt into place, setting the chain back with trembling fingers. He turned to find Atlas standing there, perfectly still, staring up at him, waiting. "What are you?" Jason whispered into the heavy air. Atlas didn't answer, but somehow Jason understood the truth without words. Atlas was no ordinary dog. He was their last line of defense, and whatever storm was gathering outside, Atlas was ready. He always had been. Jason thought they had more time to prepare, but when the attack came, it shattered everything he believed about the world, and about Atlas. The apartment was a fortress now. Jason spent the rest of the night reinforcing every door, every window. Heavy furniture dragged in front of entry points, extra locks bolted in place, brooms, chairs, anything he could wedge under handles for extra resistance. He knew it wouldn't stop what was coming, not really, but doing something, anything, kept the rising panic at bay. Atlas moved through the apartment like a shadow, inspecting every barrier Jason created. Silent, steady, patient. When Jason hammered nails into the window frames, Atlas sat beside him. When Jason taped black garbage bags over the glass to block visibility, Atlas watched. And when Jason finally collapsed into a chair, chest heaving, Atlas placed one massive paw on his knee, as if to say, "I'm ready." Jason buried his face in his hands. "I'm not," he whispered. The next day passed in a fog of tension. Jason kept Emma home from school under the flimsy excuse of a family emergency. He couldn't risk her being away from Atlas, from him. They spent the day in uneasy quiet. Jason tried to distract Emma with coloring books, board games, movies, but her eyes kept darting to the windows, to Atlas. She knew. Maybe not the full weight of it, but she felt the storm building just beyond their little world. By evening, the tension was unbearable. Jason made a quick dinner, canned soup and toast, and insisted Emma eat, though his own stomach roiled too much to swallow even a bite. Atlas ate nothing. He just lay by the front door, ears pricked forward, every muscle coiled tight. Night fell heavy and early. Jason locked them in, checked and rechecked every bolt, every improvised barricade. He set up a makeshift bed for Emma in the living room, not wanting her out of sight. She didn't argue. She lay curled under a thick blanket, clutching her stuffed unicorn, her small body dwarfed by the space. Atlas settled in front of her, his huge frame a living shield. Jason sat cross-legged by the door, a baseball bat resting across his lap. Hours passed. The city beyond their windows shifted into its nocturnal rhythm, sirens in the distance, drunken laughter echoing from the nearby bars, the occasional roar of a motorcycle ripping down the avenue. Normal sounds, but Jason knew better. Tonight would not be normal. He could feel it. And then, just past midnight, it happened. A sound. Software. Subtle. Almost missed among the distant traffic noise. A scrape. A rattle. At the fire escape window. Jason stiffened, heart slamming into his ribs. Atlas surged to his feet, hackles rising, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Jason caught a glimpse of it through the crack between the curtains. A figure, dark, lurking, trying to pry the window open from the outside. "Stay with her," Jason hissed at Atlas, gripping the bat tighter. He crept toward the window, adrenaline flooding his veins. The figure outside didn't know about the nails Jason had hammered into the frame, didn't know the window was jammed shut from the inside, but they tried anyway, desperately, violently. Jason reached the window and yanked the curtain back. The figure startled, their face obscured by a black ski mask. For one frozen second, their gazes locked through the glass. Then the figure pounded once, twice against the window, rattling the glass in its frame. Jason raised the bat, heart hammering so loud he couldn't hear anything else. The masked intruder hesitated, scanning the room. Jason saw it, the precise moment the figure's eyes landed on Atlas, on the monstrous shape standing over Emma. For a breathless moment, the world held still. Then the figure dropped from the fire escape and vanished into the night. Jason sagged against the wall, gasping for air. "Go away," he whispered hoarsely. "Just leave us alone." But it wasn't over. It wasn't even close. Atlas didn't relax. If anything, he grew more rigid, head lifted, nostrils flaring. He smelled something. Something worse. Jason didn't have time to think, because suddenly the front door rattled violently. Someone was trying to force it open. Jason leapt to his feet, bat raised. Emma screamed, a high, terrified sound, and Atlas exploded into motion. The door shook under the force of the blows. Jason shouted, "Get away! I'm calling the cops!" But the pounding only grew harder, more frenzied. Atlas positioned himself directly between the door and Emma, his body vibrating with low, dangerous growls. Jason grabbed his phone, fumbling with the lock screen, but his fingers slipped from the sweat slicking his hands. Another crash. The chain lock strained, the screws creaking ominously in the frame. Jason abandoned the phone. He wasn't going to make it in time. "Stay with her!" he shouted at Atlas, raising the bat with both hands. Another blow. The door cracked. Jason braced himself. And then, without warning, Atlas acted. With a bone-rattling snarl that seemed to shake the very walls, he hurled himself at the door. The impact echoed like a gunshot. Jason stumbled back in shock. On the other side, he heard a heavy thud, someone hitting the floor hard, and then the sound of scrambling footsteps retreating down the hallway. Atlas remained pressed against the door, shoulders heaving, growls rumbling deep in his chest. Jason moved slowly toward him, heart pounding. "Good boy," he whispered, voice trembling. "Good boy." Atlas finally pulled back, eyes still gleaming with a strange light Jason couldn't understand. Something primal, something ancient. Jason didn't know what would have happened if Atlas hadn't been there. He didn't want to know. Emma ran into Jason's arms, sobbing quietly, clutching his shirt with trembling fingers. "It's okay, Starbug," Jason whispered, burying his face in her hair. "It's okay. I've got you. We've got you." Behind him, Atlas stood tall, immovable, the only thing between their fragile world and whatever darkness lurked just beyond the door. And for the first time, Jason realized it wasn't just them against the world anymore. They had a guardian, a protector not born of this world, and whatever came next, Atlas would face it first. The attack left scars on their home and their hearts, but Jason knew the real danger hadn't even begun yet. To save Emma, he had to uncover Atlas's true origin. The night dragged on in a haze of fear and adrenaline. Jason barely slept. Emma finally dozed off against him, her small body pressed tight to his chest. Atlas curled protectively at their feet. Jason sat there for hours staring at the broken doorframe, the splintered wood where the chain lock had given way. If Atlas hadn't been there, Jason couldn't even finish the thought. He waited until the first gray light of dawn leaked through the curtains before moving. Carefully, he lifted Emma and carried her to the bedroom, setting her gently on the bed without waking her. Atlas followed, stationing himself immediately at her side. Jason stood there for a long moment, watching them, his daughter and their silent guardian, then turned away, a new resolve hardening inside him. He couldn't afford to be blind anymore. He needed answers. Real ones. By mid-morning, Jason found himself back at his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard with a manic urgency. He dug deeper this time, past the normal pet adoption websites, past the conspiracy forums, past the urban legends. He ventured into corners of the internet he'd never dared touch before, places where old knowledge lingered like dust in forgotten attics. And slowly a picture began to form. There were names whispered in obscure articles and barely legible PDFs. The warden beasts, the children's shields, creatures bred or perhaps summoned for a singular purpose, to protect the pure, the marked, the ones who glowed too brightly for this world. Jason scrolled past myths and fables until he found something chilling. A photograph, grainy, black and white, taken decades ago in a war-torn village halfway across the globe. It showed a group of children huddled together behind a single massive beast, a creature that looked exactly like Atlas. Same broad head, same intelligent eyes, same impossibly large frame. The caption read, "The Guardian appears where needed. No one summons it, no one controls it, It chooses. Jason leaned back in his chair, the air suddenly too thin. Atlas had chosen Emma, not by accident, not by chance, because something was hunting her, and Atlas had been sent, or had come of his own will, to stand between her and whatever darkness waited just beyond sight. Jason rubbed his tired eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He needed to know more, needed someone who had seen this before. That's when he remembered Harris, the old man who had warned him. Digging through his phone's call log, Jason found the number Harris had scribbled onto the back of a receipt the night he'd come to the door. He hesitated. What if it was a dead end? What if Harris was gone? What if reaching out made things worse? But then Jason thought of Emma, of her small, fragile hand gripping his jacket in fear, of Atlas standing alone against the unknown. He pressed call. The line rang twice, then a click. "Yeah," came Harris's rough voice. Jason exhaled shakily. "It's Jason. You said you could help me understand what's happening." Silence, then a low sigh. "Meet me," Harris said. "Tonight, 8 o'clock, 14th and Carson. Abandoned church lot. Come alone." "I'm not leaving my daughter," Jason said firmly. "Bring the dog," Harris replied. "But no one else." The line went dead. Jason stared at the phone, heart thudding. It was crazy, reckless, but he had no choice. He needed to know what was coming. That afternoon passed in a tense, uneasy blur. Jason reinforced the apartment as best he could, double-checking every lock, every window. He packed a backpack with essentials: first aid kit, flashlight, cash, Emma's favorite stuffed animal. And the bat. Always the bat. Emma seemed subdued, sensing the shift in the air. She clung to Atlas more than usual, bearing her small fingers into his thick fur as if anchoring herself to something solid, something real. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked in a tiny voice. Jason knelt down, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Just a little trip, sweetheart," he said gently. "We'll be safe. I promise." He only wished he believed it. As the sun began to set, casting long bloody streaks across the sky, Jason bundled Emma into her coat and clipped the leash onto Atlas's collar. The dog met his gaze silently, as if understanding exactly what was about to happen. "Let's go," Jason whispered. They left the apartment quietly, slipping into the early darkness like shadows. The streets felt different tonight, harsher, colder, as if the city itself sensed what was moving beneath its surface. Jason kept his head down, moving quickly, one hand wrapped firmly around Emma's. Atlas stayed glued to their side, his presence a steady force against the rising tide of fear. They reached 14th and Carson just as the last of the daylight bled from the sky. The abandoned church lot loomed before them, a crumbling shell of stone and stained glass, hollowed out by time and neglect. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting the lot in a sickly yellow glow. Harris was there, leaning against the rusted skeleton of a fence, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Jason tightened his grip on Emma's hand and approached cautiously. Atlas moved ahead of them, his massive frame blotting out the light. Harris pushed off the fence and gave a curt nod. "You came, Tonehi," he said. "I need answers," Jason said grimly. Harris's gaze flicked to Emma, then to Atlas, and something softened in his weathered face. "You're already standing next to them," he said, "but you still need to know what's coming." He jerked his head toward the broken church steps. "Inside. It's safer there." Jason hesitated. Then, heart pounding, he followed Harris into the darkness, not knowing that by the end of the night, the full truth about Atlas and about Emma's destiny would change everything, forever. Inside the crumbling church, the truth finally surfaced, and Jason realized the battle for Emma's life had only just begun. The heavy doors of the abandoned church groaned as Harris pushed them open. Jason flinched instinctively, his body coiled with tension, one hand clutching the bat slung over his backpack, the other gripping Emma's tiny hand. Atlas led the way in, moving with deliberate slowness, his paws silent against the cracked stone floor. The interior was a cavern of shadows. Shattered stained glass windows cast broken rainbows onto the dust-choked air. Rotten pews sat in crooked rows, like mourners at a funeral long forgotten. A massive iron cross hung askew above the altar. One chain snapped, the other groaning with the strain. "This way," Harris muttered, guiding them down a side aisle. They passed fallen beams, piles of debris, the faint scuttle of rats disappearing into the gloom. Emma clung tightly to Jason, her wide eyes scanning the darkness. Jason could feel her fear, and his own. At the far end of the church, beyond the broken altar, Harris ducked through a half-collapsed doorway, leading into what had once been a sacristy. Now it was little more than a stone shell, but it was enough, safe enough for now. Harris turned to face them, his expression grim. "No one outside this place can hear us," he said. "We can speak freely here." Jason swallowed hard. "Tell me everything," he said. "No riddles, no half-truths. I need to know what's coming for my daughter." Harris nodded, his face lined with fatigue. "It started a long time ago," he said, "before cities, before borders, before people forgot what hid in the dark." He sank down onto a broken bench, motioning for Jason to do the same. Jason hesitated, then lowered himself, pulling Emma onto his lap, keeping Atlas close. "There have always been two sides," Harris continued, "the light and the dark." He said it simply, as if talking about the weather. "The light chooses emissaries," Harris said, "rare ones. People, especially children, who carry more within them than normal. A spark, a strength that can grow into something powerful. Healing, changing, destroying darkness itself." He looked at Emma, his gaze softening. "She's one of them." Jason tightened his arms around her. "The dark senses these sparks," Harris went on, "and it fears them. Fears what they can become, so it sends things to snuff them out before they grow too strong." Jason's blood turned to ice. "Those men, the ones trying to break in?" Harris nodded grimly. "Not just men," he said. "Some are worse, twisted things wearing human faces. They've been following her scent since the day the light marked her." Jason's throat tightened painfully. Emma buried her face in his jacket. "But there's hope," Harris said, leaning forward, "because the light doesn't abandon its own." He pointed to Atlas. "They send guardians." Jason looked at Atlas, who sat like a living statue, his golden eyes never leaving Emma's face. "What is he?" Jason whispered. "A warden beast," Harris said reverently. "Forged in the oldest fires, shaped to guard the innocent. They don't age like normal animals. They don't live normal lives. They exist for one reason only, to stand between the light and the dark." Jason stared at Atlas, the weight of understanding crushing him. "Why us?" he asked hoarsely. "Why now?" Harris smiled sadly. "Because the world is darker than it's ever been," he said, "and children like her, the ones who can still see wonder where others see only fear, are rarer than ever." He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small leather pouch. Inside was a thin, worn amulet on a chain. "Take it," Harris said, handing it to Jason. "It's a marker. It'll help him focus, strengthen the bond." Jason hesitated. Atlas rose to his feet, stepping forward. Without hesitation, the massive dog bowed his head slightly, an act so deliberate, so human-like, that Jason's breath caught. Hands trembling, Jason slipped the amulet over Atlas's broad neck. The second the cold metal touched his fur, Atlas shuddered, and the air in the room seemed to change. He stood taller, more solid. The shadows recoiled slightly from his form. "The final test is coming," Harris said quietly. "Soon. You won't be able to run. You won't be able to hide." He looked at Jason with burning intensity. "You have one job, Reynolds. One job only. Keep her near him. No matter what. No matter what they say. No matter what you see." Jason nodded, throat too tight to speak. Emma clung to him silently. Atlas stepped closer, pressing his massive head gently against Jason's shoulder. "It's almost time," Harris whispered. A sudden gust of wind howled through the broken church, scattering dust and debris. Jason felt the world shift beneath his feet. The storm they'd been sensing, The storm Atlas had been preparing for was nearly upon them. And this time, there would be no warning knock at the door, no second chances. Jason rose, pulling Emma against his chest. Atlas flanked them, a silent sentinel. "Thank you," Jason said to Harris, voice rough with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Harris said grimly. "Not until you're both standing in the sunlight again." Jason didn't wait. He turned and led Emma and Atlas back through the ruins of the church, out into the waiting night. The cold bit into his skin. The darkness seemed thicker, the shadows more alive. But Jason didn't care. He had what mattered most beside him, and if the darkness wanted to take it away, it would have to get through Atlas first. Jason thought they still had time to prepare, but the hunt had already begun, and the darkness wasn't waiting for permission. The streets were empty when they stepped out of the abandoned church. Empty and wrong. Jason felt it instantly. The air was too still, the shadows too deep. The normal sounds of the city, the distant buzz of traffic, the occasional horn, the hum of late-night life, had fallen away. It was like the world itself was holding its breath. Atlas felt it too. The massive dog stiffened, his golden eyes scanning the darkness, muscles tensing beneath his thick coat. Jason tightened his grip on Emma's hand. "Stay close to me, sweetheart," he whispered. Emma nodded silently, her small fingers locking around his with surprising strength. They moved quickly, cutting across the broken lot, sticking to the pools of light cast by the few remaining street lamps. Jason's every instinct screamed, "Move faster!" They made it 2 blocks before it happened. A figure stepped out from a side alley, blocking the sidewalk. Tall, hooded, face hidden in shadow. Atlas froze, his body shifting slightly to stand between Emma and the figure. Jason's blood went cold. He pulled Emma back, scanning the street desperately for an escape route. Another figure emerged on the opposite side of the street, then another, and another, surrounding them. The trap had been sprung. "Keep moving," Jason hissed under his breath. Atlas didn't need telling. The dog growled low in his throat, a sound so deep it seemed to vibrate the air. Jason pushed Emma ahead, steering her toward the narrow gap between 2 parked cars. But the figures moved too, closing in with slow, measured steps. They weren't rushing. They weren't shouting. They were herding. Atlas stayed glued to Emma's side, his body a shield, his teeth bared in a silent, deadly warning. Jason raised the bat he carried, his hands slick with sweat. "Stay behind Atlas, no matter what," he whispered to Emma. She nodded, her wide eyes glistening with fear, but not panic. She trusted Atlas. Jason just prayed that trust would be enough. The first figure lunged, a blur of motion, a glint of something sharp in their hand. Atlas moved before Jason could react. With a bone-shaking snarl, he launched forward, slamming into the attacker with a force that sent the man sprawling across the sidewalk. Jason caught only flashes, Atlas's massive body in motion, a blur of dark fur and flashing teeth, the attacker scrambling back, eyes wide with terror. The others hesitated. Clearly, they hadn't expected this level of resistance. "Run!" Jason shouted, grabbing Emma and pulling her toward the nearest alley. Atlas fell in beside them, moving backward, never turning his back on the encroaching shadows. They darted into the alleyway, their footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. The figures followed, their movements faster now, more aggressive. Jason's heart pounded in his ears. The alley ended in a tall chain-link fence. Trapped. "No!" Jason breathed. Emma looked up at him, her small body trembling. "Dad!" She whimpered. Jason turned, raising the bat, but the figures were already closing in. Atlas stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Jason, Emma, and the attackers. And then, he changed. It wasn't dramatic. No blinding light, no explosion of fur and bone, but his body seemed to grow somehow, shoulders broadening, muscles thickening. His golden eyes flared, glowing faintly in the gloom. Jason saw the attackers falter. One took a step back. Atlas growled again, the sound deeper, older, filled with something Jason couldn't name. The first attacker lunged, desperation driving him forward. Atlas met him halfway. There was no fight, just a brutal, decisive impact. Atlas slamming into the figure, sending him flying into a pile of trash cans with a crash. The others hesitated, and that hesitation was their mistake. Atlas surged forward, faster than something his size should have been able to move. Jason shielded Emma's eyes, pulling her close. He didn't want her to see, didn't want her to witness what their protector truly was when unleashed. But part of him couldn't look away. Atlas fought like something out of legend, silent, efficient, unstoppable. He didn't kill, but he didn't need to. Each attacker was neutralized in seconds, disarmed, 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 until the alley was filled with groaning, broken figures sprawled across the ground. Jason stared, heart hammering. Atlas turned back to them. Blood splattered across his thick fur, but his eyes, those burning, intelligent eyes, were clear, focused. He approached slowly, cautiously, tail low, body language careful. Jason knelt, dropping the bat, holding out a hand. "Good boy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Good boy, Atlas." The massive dog leaned into his touch, pressing his forehead against Jason's chest. Emma clutched at his side, her tears silent but steady. They stayed like that for a moment, the three of them huddled together in the cold, empty alley. The wreckage of the attack scattered around them. Finally, Jason stood, gathering Emma into his arms. "We have to move," he said, his voice hoarse. Atlas moved ahead, clearing the way. They slipped through a break in the fence, disappearing into the maze of back streets and alleyways. The city swallowed them whole. Jason didn't know where they were going, didn't know what waited for them at the end of this nightmare. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. As long as Atlas lived, they still had a chance. And Jason would fight with bat, fists, or bare hands to give his daughter that chance, no matter what. They thought they had escaped, but fate had one more cruel twist to deliver, and this time, even Atlas might not be enough. The night swallowed them whole. Jason carried Emma through the back alleys of the city, moving fast but careful, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Atlas padded silently ahead, every muscle tense, ears swiveling constantly, his nose working overtime. The further they got from the site of the attack, the more Jason's adrenaline ebbed, replaced by exhaustion, fear, and grim determination. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere temporary, just long enough to regroup, to think. Jason knew he couldn't take Emma back to the apartment. Not now, not after tonight. Whoever was after them, they knew where they lived, had probably been watching for days, maybe longer. The city felt foreign to him now, hostile, shadowed. He guided them toward the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses and shuttered businesses lined the streets. Fewer witnesses, fewer threats. Hopefully. They found shelter in a forgotten building at the end of a dead-end street, an old print shop, its windows boarded up, its sign hanging by a single rusted bolt. Jason tested the door. Locked, but weak. A few good kicks, and the rotten wood gave way with a groan of protest. He slipped inside, guiding Emma and Atlas through the narrow gap. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stale tang of mold. Old machinery lay scattered like the bones of a fallen beast. Jason found a relatively clean corner near a back office and set Emma down gently. Atlas circled once, then lay down beside her, pressing close enough that she could bury her small hands into his fur. Jason collapsed beside them, chest heaving. For a long time, none of them spoke. The city's distant noises barely reached them here, muffled by layers of brick and decay. It felt, if not safe, then at least hidden. Jason ran a shaking hand through his hair. "We're okay," he whispered, more to himself than to Emma. She nodded against Atlas's side but said nothing. Her silence was heavier now, not the broken kind of before, but the exhausted, knowing kind. She understood far more than he wanted her to. Jason leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the cracked ceiling above. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted softly. "I'm just making it up as we go." Atlas lifted his head slightly, his golden gaze finding Jason's. And in those eyes, calm, steady, ancient, Jason found something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe it wasn't about knowing what to do. Maybe it was just about keeping moving. One more step, one more breath, one more fight. Because giving up wasn't an option. Not while Emma still needed him. Not while Atlas still stood. Jason shifted, adjusting Emma's blanket, checking the doors, scanning the shadows. Every sound made him flinch. The creak of settling beams, the distant bark of a dog, the low hum of a far-off train. He stayed alert as long as he could, but exhaustion is a heavy thing. Eventually, despite everything, Jason's eyes drifted closed. Sleep came in fits and starts, half dreams filled with running feet, glowing eyes, Atlas's low growls in the dark. Then, a sound, soft, sharp, different. Jason jerked awake, heart slamming into his throat. Atlas was already on his feet, ears pinned back, body rigid. Emma stirred beside him, blinking groggily. Jason motioned for her to stay down, grabbing the bat from where it leaned against the wall. The sound came again, a footstep, deliberate, inside the building. Jason's grip tightened on the bat. He scanned the darkness. And then, from the shadows beyond the broken machinery, a figure stepped forward. Not one of the attackers, not someone from the darkness. It was Harris. Jason lowered the bat slightly, heart hammering. "How?" he started. Harris cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "You need to leave," the old man said urgently. "Now. Tonight." Jason stiffened. "We just got here," he said. "We're hiding." "You think you're hidden?" Harris barked a humorless laugh. "Boy, they can smell her light from a mile away. You might as well hang a neon sign over your heads." Jason felt cold seep into his bones. "I can't keep running," he said hoarsely. "You're not running," Harris said. "You're moving to the final stand." He stepped closer, his face hard, lit by the flickering beam of his small flashlight. "There's a place," Harris said. "North Ridge. Old monastery. Long abandoned. Sacred ground. They can't cross it. Not easily." Jason's mind raced. "How far?" 2 hours by car if you move fast," Harris said. "You get there by sunrise. You stand a chance." Jason glanced at Emma. Small, exhausted, vulnerable. At Atlas, still, ready, waiting. He nodded. "We'll go," he said. Harris pressed a crumpled scrap of paper into his hand. A rough map, directions. "Stay off the main roads," Harris warned. "Stay low. Stay together." Jason shoved the paper into his pocket, grabbing their few belongings. Emma clung to him sleepily, sensing the urgency without understanding it. "Why are you helping us?" Jason asked, pausing at the door. Harris's face softened. "Because once," he said quietly, "someone helped me." And with that, the old man melted back into the shadows. Jason didn't waste a second. He hoisted Emma into his arms, slung the backpack over his shoulder, and whistled softly to Atlas. The dog moved ahead, scouting the way. The three of them slipped into the night once more, chasing the thin, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, North Ridge would offer the sanctuary they so desperately needed. But Jason knew better than to believe it would be that easy. Nothing about this journey had been easy, and the closer they got to safety, the harder the darkness would fight to claim them. The road to safety was long and dark, but something else traveled that road too, and it was hunting them faster than they could run. Jason drove like a man possessed. The battered pickup truck he'd borrowed from the back lot of the abandoned print shop rattled and groaned with every pothole, but it moved, and that was all that mattered. Emma sat in the passenger seat, curled beneath a heavy blanket, her head resting against the window. Atlas lay stretched across the back seat, his massive body filling the space completely, his golden eyes never once leaving the road behind them. The map Harris had given Jason was crude but clear. Follow the back roads. Stay off the highways. Keep moving north until the land rose into the old hills, until they reached North Ridge. Jason's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as the truck hurtled through the night. The city faded behind them quickly, giving way to stretches of empty industrial zones, then long swaths of cracked rural roads lined by skeletal trees. The farther they drove, the darker the world became. No streetlights, no passing cars. Just them, the truck's dim headlights, in the endless, creeping dark, pressing in on all sides. Jason risked a glance at the clock on the dashboard. 2:37 a.m. If they kept pushing, if the truck held together, they could make it to North Ridge before sunrise. If. Jason's stomach twisted with every mile, because he knew deep down they weren't alone on these roads. He felt it in the tightening of the air, in the way Atlas's ears never stopped swiveling, in the subtle way Emma stirred restlessly in her sleep. Something was coming, something fast, and it wasn't going to wait until they reached Sanctuary. Jason pushed the accelerator harder. The truck groaned in protest, but it responded. Faster. They had to go faster. The road ahead narrowed, twisting into thick woods. Bare trees clawed at the edges of the headlights, casting jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jason leaned forward, eyes straining against the dark. And that's when he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road, tall, still, face hidden by a hood. Jason cursed under his breath and jerked the wheel, swerving around the figure at the last second. Emma jolted awake with a cry, and Atlas rose in the back seat, a low, vibrating growl rumbling from his chest. "It's okay," Jason lied, his voice raw. "We're okay." He checked the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone, vanished into the dark like smoke. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs. They weren't blocking the road to stop them. They were hurting them. "Stay with me, Starbug," he said, reaching over to squeeze Emma's hand. She nodded, wide-eyed but silent. Atlas pressed his massive head between the front seats, his hot breath fanning Jason's arm. The message was clear. They're closing in. Jason pushed the truck harder, but the woods were thick now, twisting turns, blind curves, sharp drops off the side of the road. Speed was as much a danger as slowing down. The truck rattled around a tight bend, and Jason slammed the brakes instinctively. A wall of fog rose before them, thick and unnatural, swirling across the road. "Where did that come from?" Jason whispered. Atlas's growl deepened. Emma whimpered, clutching her blanket tighter. Jason had no choice. He eased the truck forward, creeping into the mist. Visibility dropped to nothing. The world narrowed to the two flickering headlights and the sharp pounding of Jason's heart. "Almost there," Jason muttered. "Almost there." A shadow moved through the fog, low and fast, something large. Atlas barked once, sharp, warning. Jason gritted his teeth and kept driving. Another movement, this time on the left. Something keeping pace with them, just beyond the reach of the lights. Jason fought the urge to floor the gas. He couldn't see, couldn't react. Speed now could kill them as surely as whatever stalked them. He kept moving, slow and steady, every muscle locked tight with fear. Another shape, closer this time. Emma gasped, pointing toward the passenger window. Jason caught a glimpse, a flash of something huge and misshapen, loping alongside them in the mist. Not human, not animal. Something in between. "No, no, no," Jason breathed, tightening his grip on the wheel. Atlas let out a thunderous snarl, his hackles raised so high he looked twice his normal size. Whatever hunted them, it wasn't afraid of the dark. It was the dark. Jason's mind raced. He couldn't outrun it, couldn't outfight it. But maybe, he could outlast it. He leaned forward, peering through the windshield. There, a break in the trees up ahead. The fog thinned slightly, and beyond it, a glimpse of a hill, a faint silhouette of a building against the night sky. North Ridge. "Hold on!" Jason shouted. He slammed the gas pedal down. The truck roared forward, rattling and bouncing over potholes, the engine screaming. The shapes in the mist surged closer, howling, an awful, keening sound that set Jason's teeth on edge. Emma screamed. Atlas barked, a sound so fierce it shook the truck. Jason didn't look. He just drove. The truck burst out of the fog like a bullet, tires screeching across cracked gravel. The building loomed ahead, dark and ancient, its stone walls crumbling, but still standing tall against the night. Jason spotted a narrow driveway leading around the side and took the turn without slowing. The truck fishtailed wildly, gravel spraying in every direction. "Come on, come on, come on," Jason begged. The engine whined in protest. Another shape lunged from the side of the road, missing the truck by inches. Atlas barked again, deep and thunderous. The driveway ended in a wide open courtyard surrounded by low stone walls. Jason slammed the brakes, bringing the truck skidding to a stop. "Get out!" he shouted. He grabbed Emma and shoved the door open. Atlas barreled out behind them, his body a moving fortress. Jason sprinted across the courtyard, heart hammering. He could feel them behind him. Hear the snarls, the pounding footsteps, the rustle of claws on stone. They were so close, so close. But then Jason crossed an invisible line. He didn't see it, didn't hear it, but he felt it. A sudden shift in the air, like stepping through a membrane of warmth. Behind them, the sound stopped, cut off, as if a door had slammed shut. Jason stumbled to a halt, gasping for air. Emma clung to him, sobbing. Atlas stood rigid, his body vibrating with tension, but he didn't growl anymore. The courtyard was silent. Jason turned slowly, chest heaving. The mist pressed up against the low stone walls, swirling and writhing, but not crossing. The things inside the fog, hulking, twisted shapes, paced furiously along the boundary. But they couldn't step through. They were trapped, outside. Jason sank to his knees, pulling Emma close. Atlas stood over them, head high, chest heaving. They had made it. Barely. North Ridge had held. For now. They reached the sanctuary, but the ancient walls of North Ridge held secrets of their own, and the real battle hadn't even started yet. Jason knelt on the cold gravel, clutching Emma tightly as the mist howled beyond the stone walls. Atlas stood like a living statue, every muscle tense, golden eyes locked on the swirling darkness. For a few minutes, none of them moved. The courtyard was eerily silent, except for the occasional low growl rumbling from Atlas's chest. Jason forced himself to breathe, to think. They were safe, for now. But safety was a fragile thing tonight, thin as cracked glass. "Come on, sweetheart," Jason whispered, scooping Emma into his arms. Her small hands clung to his jacket. Together, with Atlas flanking them, they crossed the courtyard toward the dark mouth of the old monastery. The massive oak doors stood slightly ajar, creaking on rusted hinges. Jason hesitated only a moment before pushing inside. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. Inside the monastery was a maze of shadowed hallways and collapsed chambers. Moonlight slanted through broken windows, casting long, ghostly beams across the crumbling floors. Atlas moved ahead, his paws silent against the stone, leading them deeper into the ruins. Jason's flashlight cast jittery cones of light across the walls, illuminating faded murals, old iron sconces, the remains of a sanctuary built long before any of them were born. "Where do we go?" Emma whispered, her voice tiny in the darkness. "Somewhere safe," Jason said, even though he wasn't sure himself. They found a small chapel off the main corridor, half collapsed but still intact enough to offer shelter. Jason set Emma down gently against the wall, draping her in a spare blanket from his pack. Atlas immediately lay down beside her, his massive frame pressing close, his ears flicking at every sound. Jason sank onto the stone floor, exhaustion pulling at his bones. But sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed answers. He needed a plan. His mind drifted back to Harris's warning. "Stay near the dog. Trust him, no matter what you see." Jason's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the scrap of paper Harris had given him. There were a few more notes scribbled at the bottom, almost an afterthought. "Monastery holds a relic. Sacred ground isn't permanent. Protect her through the trial." Jason's blood ran cold. Trial. The word hung heavy in his mind. This wasn't just about surviving until morning. Something else was coming. Something worse. He leaned back against the cold stone wall, watching Emma and Atlas breathe in tandem. He had trusted fate to get them here. But if there was a trial ahead, they would have to earn their right to survive. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. When he opened them again, Atlas was staring at him, not with fear, not with uncertainty, with expectation, as if waiting for Jason to realize the next step. The relic, Jason murmured aloud. It had to be somewhere inside the monastery, something that could strengthen the sanctuary, maybe even turn the tide against the monsters outside. But Jason couldn't leave Emma alone. He turned to Atlas. "Can you protect her?" he asked softly, feeling a little ridiculous speaking to an animal as if it could understand. But Atlas nodded once, slow and deliberate. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. "Stay with her," he said. Atlas settled closer to Emma, one massive paw draped protectively across her tiny legs. Jason rose carefully, muscles screaming in protest. He tightened the laces on his boots, adjusted the bat across his back, and took a deep breath. Then he slipped back into the shadowed hallways of North Ridge. The monastery was a tomb of echoes. Every step sent tiny puffs of dust swirling into the beams of moonlight. Old symbols were carved into the stone walls, symbols Jason didn't recognize. But somehow they felt protective, like the very stones themselves were still trying to hold the darkness at bay. He moved deeper into the heart of the ruins, past broken pews and shattered altars, and then he found it. A stairwell, narrow and winding, leading downward into blackness. Jason hesitated at the top, shining his flashlight into the depths. Nothing but darkness answered him. He gritted his teeth and descended. The air grew colder with every step, colder and heavier, like something old and angry stirred beneath the monastery's foundations. The staircase ended in a heavy wooden door, ancient, reinforced with iron bands that had rusted almost to powder. Jason pressed against it, and to his surprise, it swung open with barely a sound. Beyond was a small stone chamber, and at its center, an altar, low and simple, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten hands, and resting atop it, a pendant, small, simple, glowing faintly with an inner light. Jason stepped forward, his flashlight flickering wildly. He could feel the power radiating from the object. Old, pure. This was it, the relic Harris had spoken of. Jason reached out, heart pounding. The second his fingers brushed the pendant, the world shifted. Touching the relic ripped away the veil, and Jason saw the terrible truth about the price he would have to pay for Emma's survival. The moment Jason's fingers brushed the relic, reality fractured. The cold stone room, the broken altar, the heavy silence of North Ridge. All of it vanished like smoke in a gale. In their place, a vast plain of swirling mist, endless, featureless. Jason stood alone, the pendant dangling from his hand, its faint glow the only source of light in the nothingness. He turned in a slow circle, heart hammering. "Where?" he began, and then the mist shifted. Shapes emerged, figures, shadowy, monstrous, their bodies twisted and wrong, just like the things that had chased them through the city streets. Jason staggered back instinctively, but the figures didn't move toward him. Instead, they formed a ring around him, standing silent and still, like statues at a funeral. At the center of the circle, the mist thickened, coalescing into a shape. A girl, Emma. She stood barefoot, wearing her red jacket, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was pale, her wide eyes filled with terror, but also with a stubborn, burning light. Jason lurched forward. "Emma!" But he couldn't reach her. An invisible barrier pulsed between them, humming with unseen power. A deep voice, ancient and terrible, boomed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "A choice must be made." Jason spun, searching for the source. "I choose her," he shouted into the mist. "I choose to protect her." The voice rolled over him like thunder. "Protection demands sacrifice." Jason clutched the pendant tighter, the metal burning cold against his skin. "I'll do anything," he said hoarsely. "Whatever it takes." The mist thickened again, and now Atlas appeared, The dog stood beside Emma, towering, his golden eyes fixed steadily on Jason. But something was wrong. Atlas shimmered slightly at the edges, like he wasn't entirely there. The guardian holds the shield, the voice intoned, but the shield cannot stand alone. The mist shifted again, showing Jason visions. Memories. Atlas launching himself against the attackers in the alley. Atlas standing between Emma and the masked figure on the fire escape. Atlas charging through fog and darkness to reach her side. Atlas, who had been her shield, her protector, her anchor to life itself. And Jason, who had been willing to sacrifice anything except himself. The bond must be sealed, the voice said. The guardian alone is not enough. Jason staggered as understanding crashed into him. It wasn't enough to hide behind Atlas. It wasn't enough to hope the dog would fight their battles. He had to stand too. He had to become the second shield. The pendant in his hand pulsed, the glow strengthening. It wasn't a weapon, it was a key. What do I have to do? Jason rasped. The mist shifted one last time. An image formed, Jason himself standing tall, shield in one hand, Emma behind him, Atlas at his side. But there was a cost. Jason could feel it humming through the very air. He would never be the same. Not fully human anymore. Not fully of the ordinary world. Part of him would be bound forever to Atlas, to Emma, to the light. It meant giving up the easy life, the quiet life, any dream of returning to normal. It meant living with a foot in two worlds, the seen and the unseen. Jason looked at Emma through the mist, her small face, her stubborn light, her life waiting for him to shield. He didn't hesitate. I accept, he said. The pendant flared, searing against his palm. Pain lanced through him, white hot, soul deep. He dropped to his knees, gasping, feeling something inside him shift, bend, reshape. The mist roared around him. The monsters howled in fury. Atlas threw back his head and howled too. But his sound was different, stronger, brighter, triumphant. The light from the pendant surged outward, slamming into the ring of shadows. They reeled back, howling in rage as the mist itself began to burn. Jason clutched his chest, feeling something anchor itself deep inside him. The bond. A lifeline between him, Atlas, and Emma, woven so tightly it would never break. When the light faded, Jason found himself back in the stone chamber. The relic still rested on the altar, inert now, spent. Jason staggered to his feet, his body aching in strange new ways. He could feel Atlas now, not just see him, not just hear him, but feel him, his strength, his purpose. They were linked, more than master and dog, more than protector and child. They were a family forged in fire. Jason scooped up the relic, tucking it into his jacket. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew they were ready for it now, together. He turned and ran back toward the upper levels, back toward Emma and Atlas, back toward the fragile light he had sworn to defend with everything he was and everything he would become. And none of the darkness waiting outside North Ridge would be enough to take that from him. Not now, not ever. Jason was no longer just a father or a survivor. He had become the final shield, and the darkness outside knew it. The monastery seemed even more ancient as Jason sprinted through its cracked halls. Every broken stone, every faded symbol carved into the walls seemed to pulse faintly now, responding to the bond forged deep inside him. He could feel Atlas, could feel Emma, and could feel what waited just beyond the crumbling courtyard walls. Rage, hunger, fear. Jason burst into the side chapel where he had left them. Atlas was already rising to his feet, his massive form vibrating with readiness. Emma lifted her head from where she had been tucked against the dog's side. Her wide eyes locked onto Jason, and immediately her small hands reached out. "Daddy," she cried. It was the first time she had called him that in weeks. Jason crossed the space in 2 strides, scooping her up and holding her tightly against his chest. "I'm here, Starbug," he whispered. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Atlas pressed close, his head bumping Jason's side. Jason looked down, and for the first time, Atlas's golden eyes truly met his in perfect understanding. No walls, no barriers. They were one heartbeat now. Jason set Emma gently down and knelt in front of her. "Listen to me," he said softly. "Something is coming. We have to be brave. You stay close to Atlas, no matter what. Do you understand?" Emma nodded fiercely, tears brimming but not falling. She was small, fragile, but her spirit burned brighter than anything outside those stone walls. Jason rose, pulling the bat from the strap on his back. It wasn't much, not against the nightmare gathering in the mist. But he wasn't relying on a weapon anymore. He was relying on the bond, on them. A deep, rumbling boom echoed across the monastery, shaking dust from the rafters. Jason's head snapped up. They were starting, trying to force their way inside. He tightened his grip on the bat. Atlas moved to his side without a sound, his body massive and steady. "Let's finish this," Jason murmured. Together they moved back into the courtyard. The moon hung low and bloated in the sky, casting everything in a sickly, pale light. The fog outside the stone walls seethed and twisted like a living thing. Shapes prowled just beyond the threshold. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. But they didn't cross, couldn't cross, not yet. Jason could feel it. The invisible barrier created by North Ridge's ancient power, by the relic's lingering strength, by their own bond. But that barrier was weakening, fast. Cracks spidered through the air like shattering glass, and the creatures could sense it. They circled the courtyard walls hungrily, testing, probing, waiting for their moment. Jason planted himself in the center of the open space, Atlas at his right, Emma tucked safely behind the massive dog. He turned in a slow circle, meeting the swirling darkness with a steady, burning gaze. "Come on," he growled under his breath. "You want her? You go through us first." The fog pressed harder. And then, the first figure crossed. It was barely human anymore. Long, twisted limbs, pale skin stretched too tight over shifting bones. Its mouth opened in a wordless snarl, black drool spilling from broken teeth. Jason raised the bat, every muscle screaming to run, but he didn't. Atlas exploded into motion beside him. No hesitation, no fear. The dog met the creature mid-lunge with a thunderous impact, driving it back across the threshold. The mist itself recoiled. Jason surged forward, batting away another that tried to slip through on the other side. The bat connected with a sickening crack, and the thing howled, collapsing into the mist. Emma stood perfectly still behind them, her tiny hands clenched into fists. More figures surged forward. The barrier had cracked wide open now. Jason fought. Atlas fought. Together they became a wall of fury and light against the rising tide. Jason swung the bat again and again, feeling it jar through his bones with every impact. Atlas tore through the attackers with terrifying precision, never wasting energy, never missing a step. But for every creature they knocked down, two more appeared. The courtyard filled with snarls and shrieks and the pounding of heavy feet. Jason's lungs burned. His arms ached. His vision blurred at the edges. Still he fought. For Emma. For Atlas. For the family they had built from ashes and fear. "Protect her!" he roared into the night. Atlas answered with a howl that shook the very stones of North Ridge. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a stand. A promise written in blood and light. Jason took a hard hit to the ribs, spinning him to the ground. The creature loomed over him, teeth gnashing. Before Jason could raise the bat, Atlas was there. The massive dog slammed into the attacker, sending it flying backward with a sickening crunch. Jason staggered to his feet, gasping. He met Atlas's eyes, and for a moment they shared everything. Pain, fear, love, fury. Atlas turned back toward the swirling mist, ready to charge again. Jason gripped the bat tighter, blood dripping from his temple. They couldn't hold out forever. The creatures kept coming, endless, relentless. a tide of darkness hungry for the tiny light standing behind them. Jason squared his shoulders. "Then we make our stand right here," he whispered, "until the end." And with a roar that tore itself from the depths of his soul, Jason surged back into the fray. When all seemed lost, a tiny voice rose against the storm, and what came next changed everything. Jason's vision blurred with blood and sweat. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat roared in his ears. He swung the bat like a man possessed, knocking another twisted figure back into the writhing mist. Beside him, Atlas moved like a force of nature, his jaws snapping, his massive body a living shield between Jason, Emma, and the endless tide of darkness. The creatures pressed harder now, sensing weakness, smelling blood. The courtyard floor was slick with black ichor, littered with the fallen. Still, more came. Jason knew they couldn't hold much longer. His muscles screamed. His legs buckled with every step. Atlas was tiring too. Slower by fractions now, his breathing harsher, his massive frame trembling with effort. And Emma stood against the crumbling stone wall, her tiny figure almost swallowed by the night. But her eyes burned with a fierce, unyielding light. Jason staggered back, shielding her as another wave of creatures surged forward. "Stay behind me, Starbug!" he rasped, barely able to raise the bat again. A twisted thing lunged from the side, too fast for Jason to react. Atlas tried to intercept, but another creature slammed into him, dragging him down. Time seemed to slow. The attacker bore down on Emma. Jason screamed a raw, broken sound. But before the creature could reach her, Emma stepped forward. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stepped forward, her small hands lifted, and from her chest, from deep within her, a burst of pure light erupted. It wasn't fire. It wasn't lightning. It was hope, love, fury. The light slammed into the creature, blasting it backward like a leaf in a hurricane. The entire courtyard lit up, the mist recoiling violently from the brilliance. The creatures shrieked, covering their twisted faces, stumbling back into the fog. Atlas broke free, surging to Emma's side, standing tall and proud, his golden eyes blazing with triumph. Jason dropped to one knee, stunned, shielding his face from the searing brightness. It wasn't just light, it was Emma. All the love she'd lost, all the strength she'd buried, all the hope she'd refused to let die. It poured from her now, raw and unstoppable. The creatures couldn't stand against it. They screamed and writhed, disintegrating at the edges, falling apart like burned paper. Jason watched through tear-blurred eyes as Emma stepped forward again. Each step drove the mist back further. Each heartbeat shattered another wave of darkness. The pendant Jason had taken from the relic flared to life beneath his jacket, responding to her, amplifying her. He rose to his feet, awe washing over him. Atlas stood tall, his head high, his entire body bathed in the golden light. They weren't just fighting anymore. They were winning. Jason moved to Emma's side, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her face illuminated by her own power. "You're doing it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're saving us, Starbug." Emma smiled, a small, trembling smile, but real. The first true smile Jason had seen since Sarah's death. Together they advanced, step by step. Atlas paced beside them, his massive form a silent, unwavering guardian. The creatures broke and fled, their forms dissolving into the mist, their howls fading into silence. The fog itself seemed to thin, losing its grip, evaporating under the onslaught of Emma's light. By the time they reached the center of the courtyard again, the darkness was gone. Only the stars remained, glittering overhead like scattered promises. Jason dropped the bat at his side, too numb and overwhelmed to speak. Emma turned and buried her face against his stomach, her small body shaking with silent sobs. He knelt, wrapping her tightly in his arms, feeling Atlas press against them both. "You did it," Jason whispered fiercely, kissing the top of her head. "You did it, Starbug. You brought us home." Emma clung to him, her tiny fingers twisting in his jacket. For a long time, they stayed like that, huddled together in the broken courtyard of North Ridge, surrounded by the fading echoes of a nightmare. Jason didn't know how long the light would last, didn't know if more monsters would come tomorrow, or the day after, or the week after that. But for now, they were safe. For now, they had won. Atlas lowered himself beside them, resting his massive head on Jason's knee. Jason looked down at the great beast and smiled through his tears. "We're a team now," he said hoarsely. "The three of us, no matter what." Atlas rumbled softly, a sound of deep contentment. Above them, the stars blazed brighter. The night was still vast, still full of dangers. But Jason no longer felt alone in facing it. They had each other, and that made them unstoppable. After everything they lost, after everything they fought through, Jason, Emma, and Atlas stepped into a dawn that was truly their own. The first light of morning spilled over the mountains like a slow, golden tide. It touched the broken stones of North Ridge, the shattered courtyard, the crumbling monastery walls, and the three figures standing in the center of it all. Jason, Emma, Atlas. The battle was over. The creatures of darkness had fled, driven back by a force they hadn't anticipated, a child's unwavering heart, a father's desperate love, and a guardian forged by light itself. Jason watched the sunrise with heavy eyes, his body bruised and battered, his soul exhausted beyond words. But inside him, there was peace, real peace. The kind he hadn't felt in so long, he barely recognized it at first. Emma sat cross-legged on a patch of broken stone, the pendant from the relic swinging lightly from her small fingers. Atlas lay beside her, his massive form finally relaxed, his tail sweeping the ground in lazy arcs. Jason knelt down, feeling every aching muscle protest, and gently brushed a strand of hair from Emma's face. "You saved us, Starbug," he said softly. Emma looked up at him, her wide brown eyes serious. "We saved each other," she corrected. Jason smiled through the sting of tears. "Yeah," he whispered. "We did." The monastery around them felt different now. Not just ancient ruins, not just broken memories. It felt alive. The relic's power still hummed faintly through the stones, stitched into the very walls by the battle they had fought and won. North Ridge had become something new, something sacred again. Jason rose slowly, stretching sore limbs, and looked around. They couldn't stay here forever. The world beyond the mountains was still out there, still dangerous, still uncertain. But they had something stronger now, each other. Atlas patted over, nudging Jason's hand with his huge head. Jason ruffled the thick fur behind his ears, laughing softly. "What do you think, buddy?" he asked. "Ready to find a real home?" Atlas rumbled his approval. Jason turned back to Emma. "What about you, Starbug?" he asked. "Ready for the next adventure?" Emma's face broke into a real smile, wide and brilliant, lighting up the world around her. She nodded vigorously, clutching the pendant tightly in her hand. Jason gathered their few belongings, the battered backpack, the worn-out blanket, the map Harris had given him. He tucked the map carefully into his pocket. Not because they still needed directions, but because it was a reminder of how far they'd come, of the people who had helped them when they needed it most, of the battles they'd fought and survived. He slung the backpack over one shoulder, scooped Emma up onto his hip, and whistled softly for Atlas. The massive dog fell into step beside them as they crossed the courtyard one final time. At the old oak doors, Jason paused. He turned back for a moment, taking in the cracked stones, the fading murals, the faint glimmers of light still dancing along the walls. He didn't say goodbye, because this place, this memory, would walk with them forever. Outside, the world stretched vast and open beneath the rising sun. A winding dirt road led down from the mountains, disappearing into the green forest beyond. Jason started walking, one step at a time. Atlas trotted beside him, every movement relaxed but watchful. Emma rested her head on Jason's shoulder, her tiny fingers still tangled in the chain of the relic. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The road ahead would be long, hard, but they weren't running anymore. They were building, they were healing, they were becoming. Somewhere, someday, Jason knew they would find a small town. Maybe a quiet house near woods or fields where Emma could run and laugh without fear. Maybe neighbors who didn't ask too many questions about the giant, watchful dog by her side. Maybe a future where light wasn't something you had to fight for every single day. But even if they never found that perfect place, they would be okay, because they had already found what mattered most: family, trust, hope. Atlas barked once, sharp and joyous, as if sensing Jason's thoughts. Jason laughed and jogged a few steps, making Emma giggle against his chest. The sun rose higher, washing the world in gold. Behind them, North Ridge faded into the morning mist, a silent sentinel over the mountains. Ahead of them, everything waited, and this time, they wouldn't face it with fear. They would face it together, Jason, Emma, and Atlas. A family forged in light and shadow, a bond no darkness could ever break. Not now, not ever.